This set, I'm starting. It is time, it's 6:02. In fact, we're 2 minutes late. But that's part of the fun tonight. So, this is an interesting set. Long time ago, Al Peterson, the director of the festival, had asked if I could bring my whole family to play and talk and entertain for an hour. And that was the plan until about 2 weeks ago when Riley, who many of you saw Riley this weekend playing with Grand Dominion, Riley got an opportunity to go play a tuba concerto, one of the toughest ones in the repertoire. At 17, he can play this thing by Ralph Vaughan Williams. It's really difficult, and he's figured out how to play it, and the guy who directs him, and he plays in an orchestra called the Young People's Symphony Orchestra based in Oakland, East Bay. And the conductor wanted Riley to come and play this solo for another orchestra he leads, a semi-professional orchestra. So that kind of threw a monkey wrench into the plan for having the whole family here. However, when Al Peterson and I had discussed this earlier, he had also wanted Ramona, that's my daughter right there, to do a set and conduct a seminar. Now, I don't know if you guys are into the ragtime world, but they have seminars, which is just historic conversations. Things about, conversation about historic things, and usually presentations. That never didn't come to fruition, so we kind of made a hybrid of the two things. We're going to just make this hour all about Ramona Baker. Yay. And she's more than worth an hour's worth of music. And I'm really glad all of you are here. And by the way, you can't leave now that you're here. I think you'll find it actually quite interesting and riveting. We've invited some friends, people who have been part of the kids' upbringing as musicians, and people who we look up to and to play with us. So it'll be a lot of fun. Ramona's musical worldview is really about the 1890s and early 1900s. And Ramona dresses this way every day to school. When she's in high school, she's 17, a senior in San Bruno. Ramona not only has done that, but she's presented. How many seminars have you actually presented now? She's at 17. She's presented 4 historic seminars at the West Coast Ragtime Festival. So she's more than qualified to tell you some interesting things about the music she's playing. So we're going to start off with Ramona doing 2 selections of her choosing and telling you a little bit about them as we go, and then we'll bring up the happy throng. But here's Ramona Baker, folks.
Hello. Hi. Don't mind that sheet music there, that's just for show. Well, fortunately I'm glad this isn't a ragtime festival, because then there would be collectors asking if I could trade that for something. There's none of that around here, which is good. I just wanted to bring it because, the day before this, and yesterday in fact, there were a bunch of... This is just to give you an idea of the collecting world that I'm into, and that it's a little bit different from the jazz fans here. And it's a little bit more frustrating and a little bit more nerdy. So the composer of that piece, Fred Highlands, who I am obsessed with and have done 2 seminars on so far, there is 2 pieces of music up for sale on eBay of his. And they're pretty rare. Every piece of his is rare. So 2 of them showed up on eBay. One of them was one that I play and that a bunch of us ragtimers play too. And of course I got none of the music because it was too expensive. Because apparently there are people out there that want to bid more for it. And they don't know that I will kill them. Just kidding. Don't take that as real. But anyway, enough about that. That world is ridiculous, and I'm just glad that this is a jazz festival, so it's much calmer here. There's a lot less sheet music grabbing and stealing and weird strategies to get stuff before other people see it. It's ridiculous. But anyway, I should probably play something. So the first piece I'm going to play is something that you've probably all heard the title of. You've been a good old wagon, but you done broke down. But no, I haven't really heard anybody play it in the way that the composer Ben Harney actually wrote it. And on the way over here, I was thinking about Ben Harney, thinking I was going to play this song at some point. And I talked to Ed Berlin at the West Coast Ragtime Festival back in November. If any of you know about Ed Berlin, he just wrote a book on Joplin. It's the definitive biography of Scott Joplin, and it's excruciatingly well detailed. I have not read it, but I've read sections of it, and it is the best piece of research on Joplin that I've ever seen. But Ed Berlin told me at West Coast Ragtime Festival that we were talking about Ben Harney and other things, and he threw this idea at me saying, for decades everyone said, U.B. Blake in the 1930s said, oh yeah, Ben Harney was a black man passing for white. And and after that, that's what everybody assumed. So that just went unquestioned for 80 years or so. Which then recently people debunked that idea because U.B. Blake had not actually seen Harney perform and could not actually have because of the time frames and just logistics. And Ed Berlin told me that there's this ethnic group in the area that Ben Harney was from in Kentucky that's a mix of black, white, and Native American. And there's a possibility he could be part of that. Because he looked mixed. If you look up Ben Harney and you see portraits of him, he does look like he could be mixed. So that blew my mind when he told me that. And this ethnic group is the Melungeon ethnic group that's primarily situated in Appalachia and Virginia and Tennessee and Kentucky. So anyway, I'm going to play Ben Harney's most popular piece from 1895, You've Been a Good Old Wagon, But You Done Broke Down. Yes, the dance part that I played about halfway through or so was written in the music. Nobody plays it. I've only heard New York ragtime pianist Charlie Judkins play it. But the thing about the way Charlie plays it is that he does the more period accurate thing that Harney actually used to do when he performed it, where he was known for being a dancer, too. You know, not only was he considered the father of ragtime, because, you know, he originated that piece, and Mr. Johnson Turned Me Loose, and all these other really early pre-1897 pieces like that. But yeah, he did ragtime dancing that nobody had seen before. He did cane dancing, too. And the thing with that piece is that the dance part, he would actually do dancing at the piano. Yeah. The thing about Charlie is that he does that too. He's not very good, but he can work on it more. Maybe if I get an act together, I could probably do it. Because yeah, I look like the guy, so I could probably do it. Harney, I mean. So that'd be pretty cool. So why did I play that? Well, that was considered the first ragtime piece. There's other things that have that title, I guess, but that one is one of them, and that would be a piece that I would consider one of the first of those. So I have the weird viewpoint that, you know, a lot of people here like that know about ragtime think it started in 1897 with Mississippi Rag by William Carell, you know, because it was the first piece to have rag in the title. Yeah, naturally you'd think that's where it starts, with that. But in recent years, thanks to Ryan Wishner and some other younger people in this ragtime community, can say that it started before that. The term, the rag, exists before that. We know that it does, but directly relating it to music is kind of hard to do, unfortunately. But we can trace it back to the 1880s, describing music as ragged, but not definitively using it in the titles. So it's a way to describe a type of music, but it was not used definitively as a title until 1897 or 1896, because I've seen evidence of that in 1896, calling Ben Harney's pieces the latest rag hit before 1897. So what did ragtime sound like in 1896? Well, I'm going to play something that would indicate that. So there were things called banjo imitations. Those have been around since the 1820s, if not before that. I see you laughing over there.
No, go on.
See, this is what happens. It's so nerdy, you know. I feel so out of place here. It's just This is a jazz festival, you know. Banjo imitations are exactly what they sound like. An imitation of the banjo played on the piano. So this next piece is called, excuse the title, The Darky's Barbecue by Wes Osman, the banjoist. And I believe that he was not really a pianist, so I think that the composer of this is probably his accompanist, Frank Banta. Some of you probably recognize that name because Frank Edgar Banta was a jazz pianist in the 20s. But actually, this is the father I'm talking about, born in 1870. Who was the first studio pianist that most people think about. When they think about old recordings, Frank Banta comes to mind because he is in catalogs as a studio pianist. So that means he's on a lot of records that a lot of us hear now from that time period. Some of them. I'll get into the other guy later. Anyway, here is Wes Osman's The Darky's Barbecue from 1896.
Well, that's Ramona, folks. Ramona started her musical journey with a flute that we picked up at a garage sale in San Bruno, where we live. It's our hometown. Ramona Riley's hometown, that is. And I was always amazed at how adept she was at playing an instrument. She had no idea what she was doing. She had a beautiful sound. Like, she was able to produce a beautiful sound. And then she picked up some drums, and she always had perfect rhythm on the drums. And a little later in the hour, we'll discuss how she got started. But suffice it to say, once the piano came into her life, she became completely dedicated to it. I want to tell you something about her. She does not read music. She's learned all of this stuff by ear, and that's pretty amazing because the music she's playing is extraordinarily complicated music. So that's just something you need to know. What we're going to do now is we're going to bring up some people who have been part of our musical world, the Baker family musical world, for the years. Katie Cavera, who's been a friend of ours for many, many, many years. And Bill Reinhart, who's the straw boss in my band. And Bill's been a big part of Ramona and Riley's upbringing. And my good pal over here, Marc Caparone, on the trumpet. And what's been really interesting is that all of us who've come along have all been really interested in the history of music, whatever style of music. Katie and Bill are both experts in things. Bill's heard every record that was ever made. He doesn't act like he does, but he's sure heard a lot of records. Katie's a great researcher. I don't know if you know this, but Katie composes and arranges music at a very high level. Amazingly, when she was in college, she was actually she wrote music for plays. Yeah, and the stuff is not thing like traditional jazz. It's really weird stuff.
Dude, it's like Riley.
Yeah, and Marc, my friend, who's been an example of how to be interested in history and try to learn to interpret it, because Marc and I both have been obsessed with that, and that's always been part of Ramona and Riley's life, particularly Ramona's life. So we're going to play a couple of tunes just for fun here. Think of this as like a living room session. The instrumentation is going to be weird. 2 banjos. And bring the chairs in. Marc's going to play some trumpet, and I'm going to play the drums. And we're going to do Ramona, can you tell them? Ramona's going to introduce the first tune we're going to play, and she knows a lot about this tune from 1902. You can use that mic there, Ramona.
So, this first piece we're going to play is Bill Bailey. You've probably all heard it since this is a jazz festival. But the good thing about a lot of these jazz tunes is some of them are so old that they transcend ragtime and jazz. So this is one of those pieces, and it was written in 1902. It's pretty early, and the way that I've learned it is from records, like pretty much everything I learned. So this one was recorded a lot in its earliest days. I think it was recorded probably about 10 times within the first 4 years of its existence. And then you get jazz musicians taking it after that, so who knows how many times.
So why don't you go ahead and start that verse part, okay?
Okay, so
on the chorus.
I learned this from a record by baritone singer Arthur Collins with an unknown piano player who for decades was unknown. And, I remember hearing this record when I was little.
Tell Virginia to get up here and play drums. Virginia, come here.
Come up here, Virginia.
This is a really important thing. We want to introduce Virginia, who has been Ramona's piano teacher since the beginning. Come on, Virginia, play drums. You got to join the family orchestra. Yeah. Sorry to just. No, it's okay. No, this is actually, of all the people here, she's had to put up with Ramona's eccentricity probably more than any one person.
Sorry about that.
And we would like to at least give her the slight reward of playing the drums. Virginia's a very good drummer. She took it up a few years ago.
I took one from you, Clint.
And she took some lessons from Jay Hansen and myself. So, yes, this is your reward for all those years of frustration, is to play drums in the family band.
Okay. I just thought I'd come by and hear what you were doing.
Well, your timing couldn't have been better, actually. Yeah, welcome to it. Jump right in.
Now she's part of it.
So, why don't you go ahead, Ramona, and start off at the verse and then stay on the chorus, because all of us jazz musicians really only know the chorus, okay?
I'm just going to say one more thing really funny.
Okay.
When I saw Martin and Virginia yesterday when I greeted them, so I told them about the thing about the Fred Highland sheet music that got me really angry. And the first thing that Marty says to me because I have this pin on, I always have a Highlands pin on, but it's not him this weekend. Marty says, "Did you break up with Fred Highlands?"
Sounds like Marty.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm gonna play the verse the way that you played it.
Key
So,
F,
yeah.
Key F, Ramona.
Hold on, Ramona.
Just making sure I know what key this is.
No, it's like it doesn't work.
Hold on.
Hold on.
Technical difficulties here.
I just want to buy a drink.
I want you to. I should have asked you.
So Ramona, are you
There we
a
go.
Riley twin?
It's okay.
Okay, Ramona. Knock yourself out. That was our illustration of what it's like to have a session in your living room. Come as you are. But anyway, Virginia, thanks so much for all of the work you did to help Ramona along. Thank you so much. Thanks to Bill and Katie, who've been moral support. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for setting a high standard. High standards in scholarship. Musicianship-wise, I'm not sure we're the best examples. But anyway, thanks so much. So, Ramona, why don't you talk a little bit about your art? Because one other thing that Ramona does is she writes a lot. In fact, she has a blog. You tell them about your blog and your blog and your artwork. And can you tell us a little bit about that? Thanks, Ramona.
Some of you probably already know about my blog that I do. It's called R.S. Baker's Antique Record Blog because that's what it's about mostly. I mean, it's also about ragtime. I do talk about ragtime stuff and early banjo imitation music and that kind of thing, and crap. I don't know where to go from here because it's late and I'm tired, and it's hard to formulate words right now. But I put a lot of research on my blog, and a lot of it is I've been doing it for how many years? I think it's been like 4 years now. And it's just been getting better and better as I go on. The research has been easier to do and all that stuff. My primary subject is pianist Fred Highlands. Some of you can't make the obsession clear enough. Because I have 2 pieces of his right here. That one I got from a young collector, Daniel Suvigny, who had it and was like, okay, I think you deserve this. Like I said earlier, all of his music is really rare, but the reason why he's really interesting, and I think that he should be known by more people, is the fact that he's on a lot of early records. So I mentioned Frank Banta earlier. Well, everybody knows about Banta because of his son, who was a jazz pianist in the 20s. Most people know about the son, so that kept the name Frank Banta alive longer. But
I'm going to give you a little bit of background on this. This is really super significant. Why don't you have a seat, Ramona? We'll move to this part of the program right now. This is an important thing. Ramona sort of just jumped right into the middle of this thing and that's kind of the way Ramona is. But you have to understand that in the era, pre-jazz era, we all are familiar, the guys like Caparone and myself and Katie and Bill, Paul Hagelin and all of us, we were raised on 20s jazz, okay? And there's a lot known about 20s jazz because there was an obsession with record collecting. This is the culture she's talking about. In the 1930s, it really started, and people knew and worked very hard to figure out who was playing on records. Because in the 78 RPM era, there aren't listings of people on the records. Like Louis Armstrong, it might be Louis Armstrong if he's a famous guy who had a band. But it wouldn't list any of the guys and the musicians playing on the records because in those days that really wasn't important. The song title, the tune was more important than even the artists, okay? So, but there's been a lot of research done about record collecting of 20s jazz and 30s jazz, beginning 1919 era onward. But the era Ramona is interested in is the 1890s and the early 1900s, and there's even less scholarship about who's playing on these records. So what makes Ramona really unique, and she's actually been consulted by people who are very much part of that, the high end of this, the people who are the opinion makers and people who know stuff about early ragtime music.
Library of Congress has contacted me.
Yeah, she's actually helping. She's helping these guys with these projects because nobody knows for sure who the pianists are who back up singers. So let's go back. Let's talk about a typical record. So let's take a record from 1900. Okay, 1900 record. records in those days were either band records. So a band record would not be a jazz record; it'd be a John Philip Sousa type band, right? That was all the rage in those days. And if it was a singer, sometimes it would be a singer record of somebody like Enrico Caruso. Okay, so everybody knew who Caruso was. But if it was a singer like Dan W. Quinn, who was one of the most popular singers of the early 20th century, late 19th century, you wouldn't know who the pianist on the record was. It wasn't important. It was just...
It was assumed that you would half the time.
Well, or something like that. But the pianists have been lost to history. So where Ramona comes into this thing is Ramona's got an extremely good ear. She has perfect pitch. She's learned all of these tunes, and she's learned the styles of the pianists who backed these singers. And this is information it's like new research. It's like a new world. And Ramona's like at the forefront of it because she's interested in it. There's a whole group of people who are around Ramona's age, from 17 on to late 20s, early 30s, who have become really obsessed with this music, this particular era. So these people she's talking about are people who she deals with regularly. But Ramona's doing original research in this area. And that's kind of where we're talking about. It's because nobody knows the answers to these questions. And these studio musicians, these are the earliest studio musicians, worked their fingers to the bone, literally, because there weren't union rules. And these guys were unsung heroes. And one of Ramona's goals is to bring these people to the forefront. And have people know, because it is connected to the continuum of jazz music, because the ragtime style is very much what fueled early jazz. So anyway, I just want to give you a little bit of background on what Ramona's actually doing, because she didn't really explain that. That's what I'm here for. So one of the things Ramona does is she does art, and she started doing art very young. She started off writing. She actually, when she was about 5 or 6 years old, she wrote a whole book, illustrated book of art and writing. She wrote a book with illustrations in it. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is really something. And over time, she's developed a very unique style of art that's kind of her own thing. And it's pen and ink and colored with colors. And I want Ramona just to show off a couple of things. And by the way, she wants me to tell you they're for sale.
Please.
Very important.
So many.
She literally produces a drawing every night.
If not more than that.
Sometimes 2 a night. And when you see what she's doing, you'll understand. So Ramona, why don't you show them a couple of your things?
It's all inside stuff, because all of it has a story. Like, there's always a long story that goes with everything I do. So having to explain all of this would take way too much time.
Don't explain it.
So,
Just
it's usually ragtime related most of the time, and it's also these recording stars that I'm into. So it's all just and a lot of it is in the style of sheet music covers from that time, like this. So you look at this, and it's a certain style. And it's because the sheet music covers from the late 1890s had a very specific look to them, and certain publishers had different looks, but it all had a kind of a general style. And I combine it with a lot of other things, like if a lot of you know about Robert Crumb, then you've probably heard, he's famous in the blues and jazz record collecting world, but yeah.
Yeah, Ramona's been influenced also by the art cartoonists. She really thinks of herself as a cartoonist more than anything else. And she often illustrates, she actually writes there's notes usually on the drawings. But she really produces a lot of these things. She's got a great imagination for this stuff.
Yeah, lots of Highlands. He's the very tall guy with the red hair all over the place in my art.
Yeah, so she's been really producing. She just right now is involved in an art show at her high school, her senior art show, and she's got a whole wall and a half of stuff of her because she's so prolific. So why don't you grab the microphone here and let's talk a little bit about a couple other things, and then we'll get back to some playing. So Ramona, how did you get, I know everybody wants to know, how did you really get started doing this?
Well, it starts with you.
How does it start? Well, explain that to me, because explain that.
Well, I remember that you always had this Arthur Pryor's band record of, excuse the title, a Coon Band contest from 1906. And I always remember hearing that record when I was little on the phonograph, thinking, man, that's good. That's really good. I'm glad it was Arthur Pryor that I was exposed to first.
Yeah, the connection really goes back to music. Well, you started out being interested. You started playing the guitar when you were little.
Oh, yeah.
And you started off and were really interested in the Beatles. The pivotal moment I saw you change over to the ragtime was that I remember this very clearly. You were interested in the Beatles anthology, which was a thing that was on YouTube. So the Beatles anthology it covered the music that influenced the Beatles. And I remember one day coming in, Ramona used to wear jeans and tie-dye shirts and stuff. She was going down a summer of love direction. And I remember the day that things changed because she listened over and over and over again to a Jimmy Rogers record. You know who Jimmy Rogers is? The singing brakeman or whatever, the yodeling brakeman, you know.
So good.
And, like T for Texas, T for Tennessee. And I remember Ramona watched this video, because there's actually a film of him playing. She watched the video over and over and over again. I was like, wow, this is really weird. Because it connected. And then all of a sudden, you decided, by the way, she has a black belt in Taekwondo. She got it when she was 11 years old. So don't mess with her, okay? She basically took, this is the thing about Ramona's process, because process is what's really interesting in art, is how do you go about it. She took the process of what she learned as a martial artist, repetitions, working to perfection, and applied it to ragtime piano. And I really think that's the key to what your thing was, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, well, yeah, it would make sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I witnessed it, so...
Yeah.
So anyway, the Beatles anthology was a big thing, and all of a sudden that began the transition, or the changeover to the thing. So anyway, and we grew up with music all around. I played music for them in the car all the time. And it's all kinds of music, but mostly traditional jazz and ragtime. And Ruth Riley and Ramona have, that's the secret, I think, to making it work. Music was the big thing. So anyway, let's get back to having you play some more. What do you say? We got about 15 minutes.
We could. I should probably play some Highlands since I...
Why don't you play some of Fred Highlands? So Fred Highlands, just to give you a sense, was one of these unsung piano players who Ramona has been able to identify better than just about anybody in the country these days. These gentlemen...
In the world, actually.
In the world. Who they come and these gentlemen will find these vocal records and they'll say who's playing piano, and they often ask Ramona if she thinks Fred Highlands or Frank Banta or Hager.
Ooh, yeah, Hager.
There's a bunch of different pianists, and she's actually got a really good ear for it. And for years, nobody cared about this stuff. And now here she is. So why don't you play some Fred Highlands for us? What are you going to play?
About that. He didn't write that much music. Not surprisingly. It's like what they say about Joplin. He was a better... It's kind of like the opposite of what they said about Joplin. With Joplin, they said he was a better composer than a renderer. But with Highlands, it's the opposite. Highlands did write musicals and Broadway shows and stuff, but they were all flops, unfortunately. He was kind of pathetic. He didn't really was not a good businessman, unfortunately, and he was surrounded by fantastic businessmen in his time, but that was the problem. He abused his power that he had. But aside from all of that, we do have fantastic records that he's on. He's on hundreds of them because he was there all the time at this one studio at the Columbia Phonograph Company in the 1890s. He started there in 1897, and I guess they kicked him out about 1905. But yeah, he didn't write too much music in that time frame, but he did write this one piece that was recently on eBay called The Darky Volunteer. And gosh, I have to be picking all these titles. But yes, he wrote this piece in 1898 for something called an exhibition. And what these was they were held at the record company on the first floor. It's like a showcase of their talent. And it's just a big marketing campaign. But they did have entertainment, and he was always there. There's a picture of him in the corner where he's sitting there in his monkey suit looking like a walrus. Because that's what he looked like. Yeah, a 6'5" redheaded guy playing piano. Hilarious. Yes, this was supposed to be his most popular piece before he wrote his biggest hit, which is the one that I have here. But anyway, here's his piece, The Darky Volunteer, which he first introduced at one of these exhibitions and later published, self-published it. So anyway, here you go. It's a very hard piece, so if I butcher it, I'm sorry. He didn't care about how easy things were. Yeah, that's very hard. I've never learned that song correctly because it's hard and there's a lot of weird notation things in there. And I learned it. I mean, I did learn it from the music first, but then since he worked at the studio when he wrote that, of course he self-published it, so he handed copies to everyone at the studio. Like, everybody takes one. You know, so we'd assume it's a big hit because it was recorded like 20 times, but it actually wasn't. It's just because he had the leverage of working there, so he handed it to everybody. So luckily there's a lot of recordings of it by different people. That he's on every one of them because he's the pianist. So the thing about him that's so interesting, other than, you know, he's that guy that was there and nobody knew for 40 years or so, because someone did mention him a long time ago, but gave no context. The reason he's so interesting is because, you know, unlike the other guy I mentioned, Vanta had a more traditional upbringing in music and was from New York, so he was from the area where the studio was, so he didn't gather a whole bunch of stylistic features.
Where was Highlands from?
Highlands was from Indiana.
Fort Wayne, right?
He was from Fort Wayne, Indiana. which that is one of the best places to be in terms of ragtime style.
Yeah, it's also important at this point to note that in those days, as with jazz, ragtime had regional styles. So different parts of the country had different ways of playing ragtime. And there's a very specific school of ragtime playing from Indiana. So what she's saying is that this guy, Frank Banta, comes from a totally different school of ragtime performance. That's basically, because he was actually from New York City.
So they sound very different, which is where my research starts and how I was able to distinguish the pianists. I mean, yeah, you get record companies too. So Banta worked for Edison, the company that most of us know about. We all know about Thomas Edison, his invention of the phonograph. But with Columbia, the neglected company, where fortunately all their ledgers were destroyed back in the 1960s, I believe. So any evidence of knowing that Hylands was there is very, very minimal, almost non-existent. So knowing that he's there is not definitive. Nothing I say is completely final, but knowing the ragtime style from Indiana, where he was from, it sounds exactly the same as it does on records. So that's where we get the evidence from. And that's where my research, I hope, has some credit. But I love that style of Indiana ragtime also because it's really weird. You might have already heard some of it because it's how I play. And it's also because our family, the Baker family, was from there.
Yeah, it's true.
Lived in the same town at the same time as the Hylands family.
That's true.
It's weird. I actually know his descendants too, Mr. Hylands' descendants. A lot of these recording stars, I do know their descendants.
Yeah, this is another really weird thing because people are so interested in ancestry and genealogy these days. There's a lot of the people are discovering their roots, and Ramona has been at the epicenter of these people like Wes Osmond's family, who was a great banjoist. These people are all shocked to find out that their ancestors were like superstars in like 1900 or 1890s. So Ramona's been in contact with a lot of these families. It's very interesting.
It is funny though, the Hylands descendants emailing me. That was the most exciting thing that's ever happened. I was like, I had an absolute freak out, and I think you can remember.
No, I remember this. Actually, a long time ago, really quickly before we get into the last tune, I was contacted. A friend of mine, Tom Sharpstein, and many of you may remember my band. He was the clarinetist with my band, and he did a very unusual thing, like a lot of us nerdy people like Marc and Ramona and myself. Musically, he went to New Orleans in 1950 and took pictures of a jazz parade. That doesn't seem like a big deal, except nobody had taken pictures of jazz parades in 1950. And there was Katie Cavera, who left. She and I put together this video of Tom's still photographs. I edited the photos because they weren't particularly good photos that needed work. And Katie put together a video of a slideshow. It was the Eureka Brass Band. And the weirdest thing happened is one of Buddy Bolden's descendants, contacted me to ask me about her roots, her family's musical roots. And she quickly had her name is Bolden. She's still down in New Orleans. But she was related to one of the trombone players in that band, Albert Warner, who played with Bunk Johnson, and she had this whole long history that she knew a little bit about. I actually told her to contact the William Ransom Hogan archives at Tulane to find out, but I couldn't believe it that she was actually from the Buddy Bolden family. This stuff happens now because of this whole world, and in New Orleans, everybody was related to everybody anyway. Ramona, we should probably wrap it up. We've got to do it. So, what do you want to play last?
No.
Uh-oh. Why don't you play
There's not that... Hylands didn't, like I said, he didn't write much music, so not a lot of it is super good
Why don't you play the Banta thing you play?
Which sucks, because you'd expect, since his piano playing was so innovative and weird, you'd think he'd have really good music, but...
Well, don't you play a Banta thing?
I could.
Play a Banta thing.
Banta was a better pianist. I'm just going to say it now, because Hylands had issues.
He technically was better, yeah.
Hylands had a lot of problems.
So show us. What are you going to play?
We all have a lot more love for Banta because he was a better guy, and And he had a tragic life. He died at 33. He was basically the first casualty of the early recording business.
Likely from overwork.
Yeah, he worked himself to death. That's what they all said. And, well, I mean, he was 33 when he died. Highlands was 40, but the problem with Highlands is that, there were drugs and alcohol and things, so let's not go there. But with Banto, there was none of that. He was a really good guy, but, his piano style was better, and he was completely self-taught also, which helps. And which is why his style is weirder, but is also very structured at the same time. But, he's on Edison Records. You can hear him all over the place on Edison Records up until 1903 when he died.
What are you going to play?
I'm going to play how he played Benjamin Jerome's piece Lamb, Lamb, Lamb from 1900. This is taken directly from a record that he's on.
Lamb, lamb, lamb.
It has hilarious lyrics, but I'm not going to sing them. I gotta figure out how it starts, though. I haven't heard the record in a while.
So on behalf of our whole family, those of us who aren't here and those of us who are and our friends, we really appreciate you guys all coming out. Grand Dominion is going to be up next right here on stage. If you want to buy some of Ramona's artwork, she'll show it to you over here. Thanks so much for coming. We really appreciate it very much. And we'll all see you all soon. Thank you so much. Thanks.